You're listening to the Retro Mo Podcast. I'm your host, Mo, and I love to play and review old video games and a few new games too. If you prefer to read instead of listen, check out my written reviews at retromo.substack.com. In this episode, I'll be sharing my experience with the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy Color, released in 1998. I've scored this game 7.5 out of 10. A good game. A surprisingly fun introduction to the Pokemon trading card game. I had almost no experience with the Pokemon trading card game before playing this game. I was surprised to find myself very much enjoying the ride. I played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a kid, and the Game Boy Advance Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, and I played Hearthstone for years before I finally moved on from that, but I had never really spent the time to learn how to play the Pokemon trading card game. This delightful Game Boy Color game is an excellent way to learn the ropes and practice deck building using the earliest trading card game card sets. Of course, you start the game with an absolute garbage deck, but you are given a generous amount of new cards each time you win a battle. It didn't take long for me to start rolling over the easy opponents, farming up more and more powerful cards. This is an immensely satisfying process, and something I really enjoy about player versus environment card battling games. I quickly found my style and enjoyed crushing all the NPCs once I had sufficiently strengthened my deck. The visuals are solid, reminiscent of Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, with some very familiar sprites which look to have been recycled from Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow. Of course, the Game Boy Color is very limited, but they did a more than adequate job digitizing the card artwork for the game. The attack effects aren't much to look at, but I found myself much more engaged with the gameplay of the duels than the visuals. The UI can take a bit to adjust to, but once you adapt, it's serviceable. There's not much story here, and again, it feels recycled. There are 8 medals to collect by defeating the leaders of 8 clubs before you can challenge the 4 Grand Masters. You have a rival. He's one step ahead of you the entire game. Does that sound familiar? Despite the copy-pasted story archetype from Gen 1 Pokemon, it's fine. I still found myself satisfied at the end. The opponents were mostly foolproof. There were only a few times where I noticed my opponent making odd plays that didn't bring any benefit. The final 4 opponents made full use of some tricky strategies involving the legendary cards. The soundtrack from Ichiro Shimakura is way better than it has any right to be. He also composed for Mario Party 3, 4, 7, and Wii Party U. This game was clearly a low-budget cash grab intended to help sell Pokemon cards, but the game is still surprisingly fun, thanks to the solid design of the classic Pokemon trading card game. And the soundtrack just absolutely slaps. A YouTuber named Gametal even covered the battle music. Some of my favorite tracks from the soundtrack are Pause Menu and Water Club. The game is fun, but it did feel a bit short, especially compared to the epic adventures to be had in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. It took about 10 hours for me to complete the main portion of the game. I didn't bother grinding battles in order to collect the 40 cards I was still missing from my collection. However, I was excited to find that there's a sequel to this game, Pokemon Card GB2 Great Rocket Dan Sanjo, and it was released only in Japan. It has more features and a much more developed story, and I've played the fan translation, which you can find online. Check my Substack for a link. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. If you're a Pokemon TCG player and if you're interested in my final deck configuration, I ran 24 water energy cards for a water deck. I really hate not having energy cards when I need them, so I run a lot of energy. And I think it helps, especially in this early iteration of the Pokemon trading card game. I had a Snorlax. He's such a beast. I mean, he won me so many matches. I wish I had more, but I only had one. I ran 3 Lapras cards, lots of HP, and has the ability to ramp up to 30 damage, so a really great starting Pokemon to get in your hand. I ran 4 Seal cards, 3 Dugong, which has an attack for 50 damage for only 3 energy, It's probably the strongest common Stage 1 Pokemon in this game. I ran 4 Goldeen, 3 Seaking, another very fast Stage 1 option, 30 damage for only 2 energy. I only had 1 Magikarp. Surprisingly rare, I just couldn't get extra Magikarp in my deck. And so I only had 1 Gyarados, who also has 50 damage for only 3 energy. But since I only had 1 Magikarp, I only ran 1. I filled my deck out with a couple Psyducks, but I wish I could replace them with Magikarp or Gyarados, if I could. I had 3 Professor Oak trainer cards. This card is really strong in the early iteration of Pokemon trading card game. It's a great way to reload or reset your hand if you've got nothing going for you. I ran 4 Bill cards. It's just free card draw. It's a no-brainer. I ran 2 Pokeball cards. I ran 4 potions. And I think potions may be a bit underrated in this game. They really help you stay in control once you've got a strong Pokemon in play. And I ran 1 Super Potion card. I also used a fighting deck featuring Machop, Hitmonchan, which is really strong, a really strong basic card, and Marowak, and that helped me take out the Lightning Club. And in my opinion, the water and fighting sets are the strongest in the game. I had much more success just focusing on 1 energy type per deck instead of trying to run a hybrid deck. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy Color, and I recommend you try it out. Thanks for listening to the Retro Mo podcast. As always, I do my best to keep all of my content spoiler-free and rated E for everyone. If you find this podcast enjoyable or helpful, tell a friend and consider giving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. If you have questions or comments, you can send an email to retromopodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Godspeed.